Good evening. This is David Bedein. I'm with the Bedein Center for Near East Policy Research, and we've started a new project, UnrwaMonitor.com. And this is the continuation of 32 years of news coverage of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. The reason for scheduling today's program on this auspicious day in the Jewish calendar, the International Day for a commemoration of the Holocaust, has to do with the fact that UNRWA adopted a curriculum of total war against the Jews. And even though it's not only Arab supported, 47 nations fund UNRWA with no conditions. Therefore, we're beginning now a campaign, an educational effort to acquaint the world with what UNRWA is teaching. And we've done so with the help of a few fine professionals, one of whom is Dr. Arnon, whom you'll be meeting, who has taken upon himself the challenge of reviewing more than 1,000 school books that the Palestinian Authority had provided to UNRWA. And he has also helped us in evaluating the films that we were about to show one of those films. We have, using a professional staff of Palestinian Arab professionals, Arab videographers, we have filmed schools and the atmosphere in the UNRWA refugee camps for the last, let's see how many years, 24 years. So this is something for you to see and to bring to the attention of the donor country which you may be a part of. The leading donor country is Germany. The most important donor country this year is the United Arab Emirates, which heads the advisory commission for UNRWA of all donor countries. This is important because the United Arab Emirates sits on a peace treaty with Israel, has signed a peace treaty with Israel in September, which obligates the UAE to look out for any instance of anti-Israelism, incitement, and to fight against it. So we're at the beginning of a new era of formal peace with the Arab states, many Arab states, but the cold aspect of the peace is in education. So I'm going to turn over the forum now to Dr. Groiss with one editorial comment to mention that we do this independently with no government funding, no political funding. And we hope that people who see this will consider support for our work so we can continue to do our work. We have in the last 6 months gathered much material of the school curriculum being used in the UNRWA schools. And we hope to make that into a new film. We can only do that with support we get from the public. So now to turn it over to Dr. Arnon Groiss. Dr. Groiss holds a PhD in Islamic Studies, and for almost 40 years was the head of the Arabic Language Service, the number 2 man, of the Arabic Language Service of the Voice of Israel Radio. And now he's been working full time on this issue of the school books. So without further ado, let me turn the program over to Dr. Arnon Groiss, and then we'll show at least one of our films. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you all for being with us tonight. And I'll start by saying that the Palestinian Authority started publishing its school books in 2000, and in 2016 it started a new version of books. Some of them were completely changed. And the process of publishing or republishing the books is still going on, with new books coming out in 2020, and probably next year it's going to be resumed. Now, I've traced 3 fundamentals in those books, which are mandatory in all schools in the West Bank, in Gaza, and even in East Jerusalem that follow the Palestinian or PA curriculum. Why in Gaza? Because otherwise the graduates will not be able to continue their studying in Arab countries. So these are mandatory books used by government schools, by municipality schools, by UNRWA schools, by private schools, church schools, Islamic Foundation or Charity Foundation schools, anybody that follow the curriculum of the Palestinian Authority. Now, the 3 fundamentals are as follows. The first one is the legitimization of both the existence of Israel, the state of Israel, and the very presence of Jews in this country. The second fundamental is demonization of both. Israel is the source of all evil. I found over 40 accusations against Israel. Jews are enemies not only of the Palestinians and Arabs, they are also enemies of Islam from its very beginning. A demonization of Jews starts with Prophet Muhammad. And third fundamental is the total absence of any advocacy to peaceful resolution of the conflict. It's only a violent struggle for the liberation of the whole country from the river to the sea. Now, I have prepared a presentation, and let's start. This is the first slide. It says on the right side, red circle is saying not the Palestinian Authority, but rather the state of Palestine, because the Palestinian Authority considers itself the Palestinian state par excellence, and this state is under occupation, and it is never delimited or restricted to the 67 lines. This is the state of Palestine is occupied by foreigners. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, this is a lesson titled lesson number 2. Palestine is Arab and Muslim, and you see here a map in this lesson describing Palestine in one color, red, and the name Palestine appears next to it. There is no Israel, and just to make it more explicit, the Palestinian flag is flying over the name Palestine. So there is no Israel, just Palestine. Next, please. Here is a map for grade 10, history of Palestine, grade 10, map of the countries of the Levant region. And you have Syria, here, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. The whole country is Palestine. Israel does not exist. Next, please. The name Israel has been omitted. Up to 2016, you could find the phrase like Israel kills our children, Israel occupies our land, and so on and so on. Now it has been replaced by the Zionist occupation. So here you can see the Zionist occupation signed the armistice treaties with Jordan, Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon, not Israel. Next, please. The territory, or the pre-67 territory of the State of Israel, is considered the occupied Palestinian territories in 1948. I mean, it should be liberated. You can see it here, 1948. Next, please. Jews in this country are colonizer, much the same as European used to be described in America. And the tragedy of the Palestinians is very similar to that of the original inhabitants of the American continent. Next, please. Jews have no past in this country. Their history is all fake. I mean, they try to build history strengthened by archaeological artifacts, but it's all fake. It's forged archaeological findings and so on and so on. No history at all. Next, please. Even the holy places are not, Jews don't have any holy places in this country. And for example, you can see here the Wailing Wall. It's called the Al-Burak Wall in Islamic tradition. And it says that it's only Muslim exclusive right. It's not a Jewish holy place. It's a Muslim holy place taken over by Jews. Now, you can see that the picture is cut in half. The upper half is seen here, while the lower half, where you can see Jews praying there, is not shown in this book. Next, please. Since being foreigners in the country, their cities are not shown on the map. You can't find Tel Aviv, just Jaffa, Haifa, Acre, Nazareth, no Hedera, no Netanya, no Rishon LeZion, Hulon, Rehovot, nothing. And if you find a Jewish city like Eilat, for example, it's given an Arabic name. Ar-Rashash was the name of a desolate place where it was later built. Next, please. The Hebrew language is erased literally from British mandatory coin reproduced in grade 6 textbooks, mathematics. And you can see on the left the original coin. Hebrew is not a language of this country. Next, please. Jerusalem is an Arab city built by Arabs. Jebusites are Arabs, or Canaanites are considered Arabs. And no Jews have no connection to it whatsoever. And it's holy to Muslims and Christians. No Jews at all. Next, please. This is a short paragraph about Jerusalem history, and you can see that they jump over a gap of about 1,000 of years of Jewish history in this city. Jump from the Jebusites right to the Romans. No Jewish history in Jerusalem at all. This is for grade 10. It's for students in grade 10. Next, please. Let's move over to the next fundamental, which is demonization of both Jews and Israel. I've counted as more than 40 accusations against Israel, beginning with stealing the land or taking over the land and killing children and stealing water and desecrating holy places and so on, including also responsibility of intra-family violence in Palestinian society, and also letting loose, I don't know how can you undo it, letting loose herds of wild boars to Palestinian fields. So now I've chosen this piece because it's a victimization or being victimized or a piece showing victimized children in Palestine. And by victimization, you actually demonize those who are perceived to be perpetrators or the ones who are responsible for that victimization. Since I was born, they have murdered my childhood. Okay, why did they scare the birds away? Why did they hide the sun, and so on and so on and so on? You can read it for yourselves. This is part of the demonization. Next, please. Zionists and Jews are interchangeable. I mean, sometimes they write Jews, sometimes they write in the books Zionists. And the Zionists, of course, as they say, establish their entity, that is Israel, on extermination. Now, extermination is something very visible, in my opinion. Take, for example, the Ottoman Empire. In 1914, there were Armenians in Eastern Anatolia in a number large enough that they were entitled to send 15 deputies to the Ottoman Parliament. In 1916, there were none. Now, Palestinians were around 1,300,000 people in Palestine in 1948. Today, they number themselves to be around 8-9 million people, and it's quite exaggerated number, but still much larger number than they used to be in 1940. So where is the extermination? Next, please. Jews, as I said, are enemies of Islam. They are accused of trying to kill Prophet Muhammad. And you can see here that they have made a film, a video clip maybe, that shows how the Jews try to kill Prophet Muhammad. Now, in a traditional society like the Palestinian society, I mean, this is something that you make the Jews enemies of Islam, enemies of God, enemies of yourself, if you are truly Muslim. So the war against the Jews is not a national war, political war, or something like that. It's religious war, with all the accompanying traditions of martyrdom, jihad, and so on. Next, please. Jews are dehumanized devil aids, and there are some other examples as well, the wild beast on the road, infidels, and so on and so on. This is, clearly a religious war against the Jews. Next, please. Let's move over to the third fundamental piece. You can see here the part of Yasser Arafat's letter to late Premier Yitzhak Rabin at the eve of the signing of the Oslo Agreement in 1993. And he very clearly said that the PLO recognizes Israel's right to live in peace and security, and it renounced terror and so on and so on. But this particular piece, which is given in one history textbooks, is not found anywhere in any other book. It doesn't resonate. It has no echo in other places in Palestinian authorities' textbooks. Now, what we have instead, next please. Instead, we have violence. This is the anthem of the Palestinian Authority. And you can see the highlighted or the emphasized word, weapons fire, revenge again, fidai. Fidai is one who sacrifices himself or herself for a cause. It's a traditional Muslim terminology term, and it depicts today members of the Palestinian armed organizations. So this is, and it's called Fidai. The hymn itself, or the anthem itself, is called Fidai. This is the title. So you can see the violence even here, and it's taught to grade 3 students. Next, please. And this is how the violent struggle is shown to, with no words for grade 1 students. Next, please. And the struggle is not restricted to the 67 lines. This is an anthem of the youth movement of Al-Fatah, not Hamas, Fatah. And you can see Lion Cub is a male member of the movement. Flower is a female member of the movement. We have carried the ember of the revolution. حملنا جمرة الثورة إلى حيفا إلى يافا, to Haifa and Jaffa. Next, please. And this is a language exercise. It is appropriate for Jaffa that it return to our bosom. Next, please. This is a piece sold to tourists in Bethlehem. It's made of olive wood and olive tree wood, and it's written on the Free Palestine, and you can clearly see that in Free Palestine there is no room for Israel. Next, please. Even the right of return, with the so-called confirmation of UN Resolution 194, which says that those refugees who would like to return and live in peace with their neighbors would be able to do so. But they don't want to live in peace here in this particular. They will come to bring the Palestinian flag to the areas to which they would return. Next, please. Another piece, homeland. They're going to make it a homeland. The territory of 367 Israel. Next, please. Terror is also part and parcel of that struggle of liberation. Here you can see Dalal al-Mughrabi, who led a terrorist attack on an Israeli civilian bus on Israel's coastal highway in 1978, in which over 30 persons were killed, including 13 children. And this is a lesson of 4 pages with questions and exercises which praises that particular terrorist. Next, please. I'll finish by this particular slide, which answers the question, what should be done with the Jews after the liberation of Palestine? There will be, there are 6 million Jews in Israel. What should be done with the remnants? Many will be killed during the fight, but what about the survivors? Exterminate the foreigners, defeated remnants. This is the answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Arnon Groiss. The auspicious day today, besides being Holocaust Remembrance Day, this is the day that the United States government is announcing that it is renewing aid unconditionally to Unrwa and to the Palestinian Authority, especially to the education system. 58% of funds to Unrwa go to education. Let's take a look now on a few-minute clip that we prepared of Palestinian Authority education inside Unrwa.
The new U.S. peace plan for the Middle East demands an end to incitement and violence.
And the president did something unique. He recognized basically the conditions on the ground, recognized reality, that in order for these two groups to live in peace, there's going to have to be some give and take here. And one of those pieces of the give is to understand you cannot continue down the road of indoctrination if there's going to be any peace in the region. That just makes sense. And so that's what the president wants to ensure happens to protect the people of Israel.
72 years after the Arab-Israeli War, 5 million descendants of Arab refugees from 1948 still dwell in the squalor of 59 refugee camps. The camps are run by UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. The residents are indoctrinated with the notion that they have the right to return to villages that existed before 1948. This is a core principle of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization.
لازم نقاومهم ونرجع أراضينا.
نرجع على أراضينا المحتلة 48 اللي ادوا عكا ويافا والآخر.
حق العودة إنه نرجع بلادنا زي ما شردونا الاحتلال بقوة من أرضنا، فلازم إحنا نطلعهم زي ما طلعونا بقوة.
لن ندخل عن حق العودة ولن نرضى بأي وطن بديل وبأي عاصمة غير القدس الشريف. سنعود إلى ديارنا.
لكن نجي بنقعدهم إنه أنت إيش بلدك إيش بلدك إيش بلدك. الأطفال اللي بتعرفوا على كذا بلد، مش أنا بس القدس، لا أنا إذا أنا وطني فلسطين في كذا مدينة. يعني في بصير انتماء أكثر للطفل. يعني بصير الأطفال هنا يعني إحنا ما بيخلي يعني حتى الآن صار الولد عند الطفل أو البنت إنه صارت كتير متشوقة ترجع لبلدها الأصلي.
أنا بشوف كل ما يمر يوم على النكبة وعلى التهجير كل ما اقترب موعد العودة إن شاء الله. العودة والتعويض ولا بديل ولا بديل ولا بديل.
ثقافة حق العودة أكيد نركز عليها كثيرا، وأكيد هذا هو جزء لا يتجزأ من ثقافة مناهجنا الدراسية. نعطيهم نوصل هاي المعلومات لطلابنا في مدارسنا عن طريق مواد التربية المدنية والتربية الوطنية.
السلام عليكم. بدي أسألكم من وين أنتم أصلكم؟ من أي بلد؟ وبعدين بنحكي عن النكبة شوي. تفضل. من أي بلد؟
من فلسطين.
من حيفا، يافا.
إحنا من حيفا.
من حيفا.
من يافا. من قضا يافا بيت دجن.
بيت دجن.
يافا قضا يافا.
راجع بلادي راجع بلادي على أرض الأقصى، راجع بلادي أنا ولادي أنا ولادي على أرض الأقصى راجع بلادي يا محلى القعدة يا محلى القعدة في حكورتنا يا محلى القعدة ما بنسى وعدي ما بنسى وعدي نرجع أرضنا وما بنسى وعدي.
Because of the antithetical culture of UNRWA, Arab refugees remain in the camps. UNRWA provides health, education, and health services. At the same time, it promotes an ideology that perpetuates war, encouraging residents to remain in their homes until they can conquer Israel and create a new country of Palestine. For decades, the United States was the lead donor to UNRWA, paying for about half its $1.2 billion budget. The U.S. stopped funding UNRWA last year after it determined that American tax dollars had been used to prolong the suffering of yet another generation of refugees. Within UNRWA schools, peace is never discussed. Instead, war is taught daily in prose and in songs.
لا مش حيصير بين احنا واسرائيل لانه شردونا وقتلونا.
انه الاحتلال يعرف انه احنا انه هاي الارض إلنا ومش إلهم، انه يعني هاي مش ارض بلا شعب، هاي ارض عليها شعب فلسطيني.
فيش سلام بيننا وبين اسرائيل لانه بخربوا حقوق الفلسطينية انهم يرجعوا لبلادهم. اكيد لا، لانه احنا لا بنعرفهم ولا هم بيعرفونا.
مش راح يكون سلام بيننا وبين اسرائيل لانه اسرائيل هي عدوتنا.
وانا بحب اروح وانا بحب ارجع على كفر قاسم غصبا عن اليهود وانتصر على اليهود. هم مجموعة من الكفار والناصرة ولا بيحبوا الله ولا بيعبدوا الله وبكرهونا.
نحن الثورة والغضب، نحن من الأجيال من هون من عنا انكتب تاريخ الأبطال. نحن الثورة والغضب، نحن من الأجيال من هون من عنا انكتب تاريخ الأبطال.
ولما أم الختيارة صبح نادت عالجارة وقتلا الحجارة تنرشك عالدورية تنرشك عالدورية. ميت عصابة قوي عالغرية لا تكوني فنسلم عبقرها لا تنسى الناس بأرض العربية.
فلسطين الناس نبيحها بضلهم عنا فلسطين الحرة، هنرجع بلادنا لازم نهجم عليهم.
قول إن شاء الله سنة وراح نحررها، لازم نحررهم عشان نرجع أرضنا.
لازم نقاومهم ونرجع أرضنا اللي أخذوها منا. هاي لما طلعونا منها بالقوة، إحنا لازم نطلعهم من بلادنا بالقوة وغصب عنهم راح يطلعوا. مش راح تضل فلسطين إسرائيل في فلسطين، لأنه فلسطين مش للبيع والقدس مش للبيع، راح تضلها إلنا. القدس عاصمة فلسطين الأبدية.
نحاربهم ونقاومهم يعني بأكتر إشي بنقدر نعمله.
في القرآن الكريم مكتوب إنه زوال إسرائيل راح يتم على يد الفلسطينيين.
At UNRWA schools, education is not limited to texts and is not confined to the classroom. Inside schoolyards, students pass by violent graffiti that glorifies killers. One of the Palestinian heroes is Dalal Mughrabi, whose image adorns alleyways near UNRWA schools and neighborhoods. In 1978, she led a terror gang that commandeered a bus and murdered 38 passengers, including 13 children. On the paths of UNRWA camps, children speak about Mughrabi with awe and reverence.
صور شهداء سووا عملية، إنه سووا عمليات لأجل الوطن. يعني دلال المغربي سوت عملية تفجير فجرت حالها عند الجيش.
يعني زي أختي وأمي بنت بلدي.
دلال المغربي هي شهيدة فلسطينية فجرت اليهود وهجرتهم.
دلال المغربي أول شهيدة فلسطينية فجرت من الجيش الإسرائيلي، يعني سوت عملية استشهادية.
UNRWA schools portray Mughrabi as a role model. In its current curriculum, Mughrabi's photo appears in a study book for third graders. It is a key lesson in Our Beautiful Language, a new textbook issued in 2019. On page 63, pupils learn to chant the Land of the Nobles. The assignment calls for kids to liberate Palestine and to exterminate the current residents of Israel, the Jews. Here they chant the song in the classroom. Their lethal melodies do not resonate just in the classroom. Here, a teacher leads the same war song during a field trip as children prepare for the liberation of Palestine with toy guns.
وأزيل الغاصب من بلدي وأبيد فلول الغرباء يا بلد الأقصى والحرم يا مهد النخوة والكرم صبرا صبرا فالنصر لنا والفجر يطل من الظلم قسما سأضحي بدمائي لأروي أرض الكرماء لأروي أرض الكرماء
When we visited UNRWA schools, we found students eager to deny the existence of Israel or any Jewish connection to the land.
طب ايش اتعلمت عن اسرائيل؟
انهم الكلاب باخذوا ارضنا، فيش دولة اسمها اسرائيل، محتلة فلسطين، وفيش بعدين اشي اسمه اسرائيل.
هل ممكن الاسرائيليين يضلوا هون في فلسطين؟
لا، بنهجرهم من هون. تعلمنا انه احنا لازم ما نخليش اراضينا لحد بنعرفهمش، ولازم ما نسكتش عن حق. فيش شيء اسمه اسرائيل لانه احنا اسمها دولة اسرائيل. احنا بس فلسطين إلنا. مستقبل القدس ان شاء الله راح تكون إلنا. اكيد على اكيد، وفيش شيء لا اسرائيل ولا شيء اسمه اسرائيل.
Given America's new insistence that Palestinians eliminate incitement and violence, perhaps more UNRWA donor countries will ask why they allow millions to live as refugees in perpetuity.
Okay, again, this is David Bedein. What our agency has suggested is an overhaul of UNRWA policy to ask donor countries to adopt what we call the UNRWA Reform Initiative, which would ask each donor country to look at the issue of education, the issue of transparency, and to reevaluate whether they should just give a blank check to UNRWA. I would like to ask two journalists to come on now and discuss how they view this. Judy Bayland, maybe you give us a few minutes of your thoughts about what you've just seen.
Okay. First of all, thank you to the agency and to David Bedein and to Dr. Groiss for the years, decades of work that you've been doing on this issue. No matter how many times one sees these images, and this of course is updated, and the material that Dr. Groiss presented is very updated material. No matter how many years one sees these, it's very depressing, needless to say, and very distressing to see this kind of material, especially as you pointed out, David, on Holocaust Memorial Day. But there's so many issues here that come to mind. I don't even know really where to start, but what is the formal response when you gentlemen have presented, and the agency has been presenting this material for decades now to the donor countries. And yet we see still, we're now in 2021, and the situation seems to be, if not worse, equally as bad as it's been for decades. What's the response that you're getting from the donor nations themselves? How does a donor nation, Germany, for example, which is the prime donor nation at the moment, now that the US has up until today backed out, how do the German officials respond to your efforts to bring this to their attention? How do they justify giving money to schools like this? And I should, one other thing occurs to me, by the way, having spent some time in places like Bethlehem and Ramallah. I mean, this is not just an issue of the schools. I mean, we focus today on the schools, but clearly this is a problem, which is not a surprise because these people are growing up. It's a problem across Palestinian society. You see, I've seen with my own eyes in Bethlehem, the martyr posters. If you just walk around the market, for example, you know, there are many posters all through the cities that are run by the PA that laud and glorify martyrs. So this is a problem that I think is not just confined to the schools, but is clearly a problem in Arab society, in much of Palestinian society. So I would just ask both David and Arnon, Dr. Groiss, how do the donor nations respond to you when you bring this to their attention? What is their justification for allowing this lack of transparency and allowing their funds to be used for this kind of material to be disseminated?
Dr. Groiss, would you like to mention how you were received in Germany when you presented this at the Bundestag?
Well, they were quite shocked, and they tried to say that it's impossible to be, I mean, it should not be done, and they didn't have any excuses even, but we didn't speak to the policymakers. We spoke to members of parliament and some other guys, and they were shocked, and that was it.
Dr. Groiss, I accompanied you to the Bundestag, along with Rabbi Abraham Cooper from the Wiesenthal Center. We asked to see policymakers, and we were not given that opportunity. After we left the Bundestag, Germany doubled its donation to UNRWA, and we've had a dialogue with the German embassy and the German consulate here. And most recently, we received 2 responses from the German consulate, German embassy and the German consulate. The German embassy gave the German ambassador gave an interview to a newspaper called Makor Rishon relating to our feedback, saying this, they see nothing wrong with the school books or education and that they're funding. And we got a letter 2 weeks ago from the German consulate, which is directly in touch with the PA and UNRWA, that this is their model operation for humanitarian aid. And as a result, our agency, the Bedein Center for Near East Policy Research, has recently begun a section specifically deal with Germany, and to put all our material out in German, and we're right now raising funds to produce a full-length movie feature on this subject to be presented at the Bundestag, and to make sure that the movers and shakers in Germany see this film and see this issue. I must mention something positive, that we've had 5 meetings with officials at the Office of the UN Secretary General, and the response we got there was amazingly positive, encouraging us to be in touch with all the donor nations, and because that's where the change can happen. And there is a dormant, right now it's dormant, but it will be revived after the next election, a Knesset lobby for UNRWA reform, which can have an effect. I can just say that if donor nations, you can see the donor nations on the website on our website, israelbehindthenews.com, and also on the UNRWA website itself. It's right there. Nothing is hidden. Everything's transparent, and they're just waiting for pressure, waiting for feedback. And the function of a program like this is to generate feedback. And I encourage people watching this program to sponsor this program elsewhere and to sponsor publicity for such a program. I must emphasize that the work that we do, we also have a professional who evaluates the placement of terrorist organizations inside UNRWA. Another professional who is going through the books of UNRWA, the accountability, and will be issuing a report next week on the lack of UNRWA accountability, always crying that they have no money, and yet $1.2 billion flowing from the donor nations. So these are open discussions, and the response, as I mentioned, from when we had a meeting, last meeting of the UNRWA lobby for UNRWA, the Knesset lobby for UNRWA reform, we watched each of the consuls as they responded, and in the corner we saw the people from Germany snickering, laughing as we showed this kind of film. So it's an uphill battle, and we have to make sure that the movers and shakers of Israel pay attention to this. We do not take funding from the government of Israel or from any political party. It makes it a little bit more difficult, but on the other hand, that maintains our credibility. I'd like to ask Benjamin Wiehenthal, who is a journalist who is located in Germany, to come on and give us his perspective of what he's seeing today.
I think I'm not sure he's here, but
amongst the people who are here.
Judy, you wanted to say something else?
Well, I actually have a lot of questions, but go ahead, Benjamin. I'll defer to you. If we have time, I'll get to some of my questions. But go ahead.
Is Benjamin here?
He was here.
Okay, the microphone was locked. Now it's open, so I don't think he's here currently.
So let me jump in then while you're looking for him with several questions. Now this question might be naive, but are there people of conscience? I mean, when anybody sees this material and you see children being raised with this atmosphere, and you see just last week, I think, the Fatah, not even Hamas, Fatah honored one of the planners of the Munich massacre. Again, clearly in Palestinian society, in certain parts of Palestinian society, this kind of attitude is, this anti-peace attitude is endemic. But let me ask this, are there people of conscience? Have you found people of conscience within Palestinian society, courageous people? Obviously, they would have to be extremely courageous people who might speak out. Are there any elements within Palestinian society of people who are saying, wait a minute, we're educating our kids for destruction here and to be, horrible human beings? Is there anybody to work with on that side that could be supported by pro-Israel people in order to protect them in some way? Can we engender anybody like that on the Palestinian side?
The answer is yes. And we do have a group of individual Palestinian Arab individuals who have come forward. Getting the mainstream media to cover them and to interview them has not been easy. The problem is not on the Arab side, the problem is on the Jewish side. Too many people see an interest in continuing the status quo with the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA, and not looking to publicize Palestinian Arabs who have called for an end to jihad education, for transparency, and the most important thing, there is a widespread attitude amongst Palestinian Arabs who want to leave the UNRWA camps and get resettled. And I've been following this issue for 33 years. And getting anyone in Israel, and even the Israeli media, to interview people who want to leave the refugee camps and get on with their lives, it's almost an impossible situation. 50 years ago, when I came to Israel and began to raise these issues, I met with Israeli government officials who said, "Oh, they're very good for cheap labor." And by the way, I just see a questionnaire put out. Someone, Judy Kaddish, who we know, she just mentioned, isn't incitement to genocide a crime under international law? Of course it is. Of course it is. If find me a lawyer who will raise the issue, conduct a legal forum, find lawyers in Israel and around the world to work on this issue, it can be worked on, because what we have here, it used to be incitement, and that was all it was. Now it's indoctrination, brain brainwashing on a very high level. So again, if there's lawyers willing to come forward, the people willing to organize a forum on that subject, is very important, and it will resonate. And that's because we cannot afford to have this kind of education. The attitude in Israel is it's not of our business, but that is something that's been endemic to the Oslo process. We should not interfere because of what they call the right of self-determination. Well, right of self-determination has its limits. Dr. Groiss, your thoughts?
Well, I just remember the name of Professor Muhammad Dajani, who actually he tried to make some reconciliation through the teaching about the Holocaust. And he used to be the head of the Palestinian University of Al-Quds in Jerusalem. And he took some of his students to Auschwitz, and then he was actually his car was being burned, and he lives now outside this country. He lives in the States, I think.
Could I ask Dr. Groiss? The material you presented, again, is very new. It's very recent. A lot of it is from 2019, 2020 even. Would you say, well, two-part question. I've seen a lot over the decades. I've seen a lot of the similar material, from previous, from 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Would you say that the material that you've found in the last couple of years is worse than it was? Is the incitement factor worse? Is it similar? And if so, if it is the same or worse, to what do you ascribe that? Why is it that here, you people have been conducting this campaign for decades? You would think that Palestinian society, has evolved. Clearly not. But what are the factors that are going into this continuing level, if it is in fact that way? And the second part is there a difference between what you see in the West Bank and in Gaza? Are there two different streams of insightful material? Are they educating their kids differently in the two different parts of society?
First of all, there is one school system for Judea, Samaria, Gaza, and Jerusalem from UNRWA. Number two, the deterioration of the education coincides with the influx of money from Germany, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the new advisor to all the donor countries, that's the United Arab Emirates, in which we would expect something more from because Israel signed a deal with them. Let's bring Benjamin Wiehenthal into this discussion. Mr. Wiehenthal, let's hear your perspective. You're a journalist based in Germany, and your perspective is important to us. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks for everybody's participation. And it was a real treat to hear Professor Groiss's super granular presentation on incitement and anti-Semitism, lethal anti-Semitism in the UNRWA curriculum. I'm on a separate call right now that I need to return to, so I'll be brief regarding my take. Just by way of background quickly, I'm a fellow for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a Washington-based think tank that deals with combating terrorism, ideologies, and the promotion of democracy. I'm in Jerusalem right now, and I go back and forth between Berlin and Jerusalem. And I've been covering UNRWA and issues involving the PLO and the Palestinian Authority and Hamas for roughly 20 years in connection with Germany. The main problem as I see it, I mentioned this yesterday during our German language presentation, is Germany is infatuated with UN organizations. Germany has, since the Second World War, since the creation of the UN, viewed UN entities and the UN as the be-all and end-all of solving world problems. And their policy toward UNRWA has been to support UNRWA-related anti-Israeli resolutions in the UN. At least 4, I believe, last year, resolutions were supported by Germany. At the same time, Germany's foreign minister Heiko Maas has declared he went into politics because of Auschwitz, but his foreign policy has been consumed with passing or supporting one anti-Israeli resolution after the next at the UN. This led the Simon Wiesenthal Center in 2019 to include Germany's ambassador to the UN. At that time, he was on the Security Council, Christoph Heusgen, on its list of the 10 worst outbreaks of anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli conduct. The reason Heusgen, the UN ambassador from Germany, was listed was he equated Israel with the Hamas, the terrorist entity Hamas that controls the Gaza Strip, during his speech on the UN Security Council. So you get a sense that while we're on this speaking on International Holocaust Day, all sorts of questions are raised whether Germany has internalized the lessons of the Holocaust and that whole debate. Germany's policy, whether wittingly or unwittingly, is, in my view, meets the criteria, at least of the modern definition of anti-Semitism. Whether these diplomats are contaminated with anti-Semitism, that's a separate question. I do think the motivation is relevant here. I've written a fair amount about what's called guilt offensiveness anti-Semitism in Germany, and I think that's the most compelling explanation right now in terms of what's happening in Europe and why there's this intense preoccupation with Israel at the UN and also in European capitals. The Israeli psychoanalyst, many of you have probably heard this quote from Zivi Rex in the 1980s, said that the Germans will never forgive the Jews for Auschwitz. Now, he meant that in a very biting and sarcastic way, but he captured something I think that's uniquely important about the social psychology of many Germans and the German government. Namely, the German response to the Holocaust produces feelings and a personality structure that's filled with pathological guilt, and that guilt is turned into a form of Israel bashing. That is, how do you purge this guilt from your character structure? And you do that by slamming Israel at the UN, supporting anti-Semitic Unrwa policies, etc. I would argue now that Zivi Rex's theory, which is largely based on two German Jewish Marxist philosophers, Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno, has been elevated to the point where Western Europe won't forgive Israel for the Holocaust. So you have this, again, you have Western Europeans, their governments during the Holocaust and family descendants, and perhaps some people who are still living today who were directly or indirectly involved in the Holocaust, are responding to the crimes of National Socialism and complicity by singling out Israel on the world stage. And I think I simply can't find any other, as I said, plausible explanation for why there's so much UN-based animated anti-Semitism and why Western European countries join the jackals like the Islamic Republic of Iran to support anti-Israeli Unrwa resolutions. So also this year, and I'll end here, another German diplomat was included on the Wiesenthal list for this year, last year, 2020, who was tweeting away pro-BDS articles from a South African-based BDS professor. He's the head of their, his name is Andreas Gorgon. He's the head of their cultural department. He's a very senior level diplomat, but again, this is someone who's part of the German foreign ministry that has been pushing the UNRWA budget, and Germany, as I think David mentioned yesterday, is the largest funder of UNRWA. You have diplomats who are pushing BDS, singling out Israel, and at the same time, Germany claims it's internalized the lessons from the Holocaust. I would argue Germany is fixated on the period between 1933 and 1945, and they simply won't confront this UN-based anti-Semitism and the anti-Semitism coming from UN organizations, even though we know that the UN right now is most of its organizations dealing with Israel are largely contaminated with some form of contemporary anti-Semitism. So I guess that's my take on Germany. It's a lot of sort of kitchen sink psychology in how within 10 minutes, but I hope it gives you a flavor that this problem is very deeply anchored in Germany, and it's going to take a U.S. administration and other Western governments to crack down on the Germans, even with raising the idea of possible sanctions or because on some level I think Winston Churchill was right about Germany, and I'm grossly oversimplifying this, but the Germans are either at your throat or your feet, and right now in terms of the UN, they're at Israel's throat. So I'll end there.
Benjamin, I don't know if you can stay on, Benjamin, but and maybe other people would respond to this, but is there, again, maybe this is a very naive question, but is there no way that particularly the Germans would see this as, to take away the Israel notion, but to just see this as people who are raising children to hatred, never mind of whom, they are raising children. This is such a politically incorrect thing to be doing these days. You're raising children, all the things that we saw in the film and all the things that Dr. Groiss has expressed in the textbooks. If you take away the political part of that, I mean, you are just raising children with hatred. And that is something that any civilized society, and particularly Germany, which raised, of course, during the 1930s, inculcated an entire society that way. I would have thought that approach might be a way to get at this issue some way. Is that completely unrealistic, Benjamin?
Judy, thanks for your question. I think, there's this phrase in Germany, which is translated into English as nip it in the bud. And that's sort of the German moral call for action when there's a rise of anti-Semitism or fascism or xenophobia. And of course, it's one of these slogans that when you try to match it with action, turns out to be sort of an empty slogan. And this idea of nip it in the bud that started after World War II simply is non-existent when it comes to fighting, I would argue, Islamic animated anti-Semitism. Yes, Germany will pursue in a very vigorous way the 2 or 3 Nazis in Eastern Germany who say they want to seize power and bring about a new Hitler movement, and they're unemployed in one of the sort of low density areas of Eastern Germany. But when senior figures from the Islamic Republic of Iran, for example, Mohammed Larijani and his brother Ali Larijani, who is the head of the parliament, Ali Larijani in Iran, these are very prominent Iranian anti-Semites who are part of the regime, show up in Germany and announce at the foreign ministry and at the Munich Security Conference that the Holocaust was non-existent. And here's an opportunity to nip it in the bud and prosecute them. Germany decided not to prosecute them, not even to condemn them. So, and I've documented this in German language articles and English language articles. And, again, when a minor neo-Nazi does this, and this is German law, they will prosecute him. So my point is that when it comes to the most dangerous threats targeting Israel, namely the Islamic Republic of Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, terrorists within the PLO and Fatah, Germany's approach has been to look the other way and at times actually take their side, as we see with Germany's infatuation with preserving the nuclear deal with Iran and not conditioning UNRWA funding on the reduction or the elimination, I should say, of what Dr. Groiss presented in his exhaustive presentation, anti-Semitism. So there's all sorts of things the Germans could do. Obviously, the Israeli government, I should add, needs to pressure the Germans. And there are question marks over whether there's been enough pressure from the Israeli government, the Knesset, And the U.S. government, at least under the previous administration, was doing a lot in this arena. I reported on the the American ambassador to Germany, Richard Grinnell, who would raise these type of questions all the time with Germany. He was the single best ambassador to Germany since the Holocaust and helped bring about a ban of Hezbollah in Germany. That's Richard Grinnell, who then became the acting director of national intelligence for the U.S. government. But again, in order to influence a change in behavior, German behavior, one needs to crack the German whip, the old school. You need to crack the whip to change their behavior and their thinking. It's not going to come from ethical appeals. It's going to come from the Israeli government or in the U.S. government saying we're going to, we're not going to. For example, the Israeli government could say we're not going to participate in these German Shoah events until you stop this type of funding. The Israeli government could say we're going to hold a press conference with the American ambassador and urge the German government to stop funding UNRWA. Or, I mean, this is during the Trump administration, but the Israeli government could hold a press conference with Holocaust survivors and say it's time to stop funding eliminatory anti-Semitism in terms of UNRWA. All I'm saying is that describing the problem, and that's what that's what a lot of what's happened, is not going to bring about a change in German behavior toward UNRWA. You need, as I said, to begin to think about a very confrontational, aggressive approach with the German government and also its members of parliament who have gone to great lengths to prevent any reform of UNRWA and the UN. One party, a small party, brought a resolution to the UN, and I'll end here, 2 years ago, I believe, to change Germany's anti-Israel policies at the UN and its pro-UNRWA policies. And this resolution was voted down by all of the major German parties in the Bundestag. The message then is business as usual. So, yeah.
I'm going to add one more dimension to this discussion, which you can take home with you. I've been covering this issue for more than 30 years, and I'm going to say it in a very simple way. I've seen a reduction of hate education and an increase in war education. We've been filming them, and when you look at our films on our sites, IsraelBehindTheNews.com and Unrwa Monitor.com, you'll see children being trained with weapons. You don't see hatred coming from their lips. You see regimentation. And I can just tell you, the more we show that, the more we've had more, how should I say, feedback from that. And I hope to be able to coordinate visits of people whose loved ones were murdered by the PLO and the killers are being awarded by the PLO. It's that face of people who have suffered from this regimentation education. And Germany understands what that means from what it's been through. So how we do that, how we move that ahead, how we have more programs where more press conferences and in these temporary days of Zoom present that aspect, it may have more of an influence. Because let's put it this way, anti-Semitism, no one really knows how to take that. But when you see children being trained as killers, as child killers, that may have more of an effect.
Yeah.
So I'm raising that as an issue. I'm asking people who see this program, we're going to be sending this around so it will go viral, to consider that approach. And we're privately supported. So people who want to privately support what we're doing, how you do that is on our site. And I can just say that Benjamin, your perspective from witnessing the German attitude is something we've seen. So we may have to use new tactics to get the point across.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I left my email in the chat session. And thanks for listening, and hope to, be on another program. Thanks, David, for all of your important work. You work tirelessly for these reforms. So again, I tip my hat to you and your organization.
Well, I have to give full credit to where I have a how shall I say, a conflict of interest. I have 10 grandchildren, and I don't want them growing up with this kind of adversary being supported.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.